أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يعلم الله الذين جاهدوا منكم ويعلم الصابرين. Do you think you will enter paradise without Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala proving which of you truly struggled for His cause and patiently endured? When an individual resolves to follow the path of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, the Sunnah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the religion, the deen and the millat brought to us by Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, then naturally the system of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is such that one will be confronted with various sorts of difficulties and various sorts of problems. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala in the Quran has mentioned in Surah Al-Ankabut, Alif Lam Mim, أحسب الناس أن يتركوا أن يقولوا آمنا وهم لا يفتنون. That do people think they will bring Iman and after that they will be left, they won't be tested, they won't go through any types of trials and tribulations? So these problems sometimes create a state of uncertainty in a person. Sometimes they make him have negative feelings. Sometimes he is tempted to embrace a certain version of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, like is apparent nowadays that na'udhu billah, Allah Ta'ala is unjust and unfair. However, when a person is tested, when a person is put into a difficulty and a problem, then that test is a barometer to show his true Iman. Whatever reaction a man would show, a person would show on that occasion would be an indicator of whether his Iman in his Iman is truthful or whether he is false in his Iman. So if a person accepts the difficulty, a person endures the difficulty with patience, a person accepts that this is from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala and he praises Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala no matter what, then he has been successful in the test that he is going through. On the contrary, if a person begins to question Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, either verbally or either by mind and heart, he feels that Allah Ta'ala is being unfair or unjust in certain things, and he says, how I wish it would have been this way, how I wish it would have been that way, this life is miserable, etc. And then he will be a failure in the test that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has put him into. So the nature of this world in this verse of the Quran has been mentioned, that as Muslims, as believers, we will go through some sorts of difficulty and trials. This verse appears when discussing the battles of Badr and Uhud between the Muslims and the non-Muslims in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. On the occasion of Uhud, the Muslims suffered a loss. They lost some of their men. Some of the Mujahideen had passed away, while others were also injured. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum outwardly had lost the battle. However, as far as religion and Islam is concerned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all he needs to see is sincerity in a person and his reaction to what he has gone through. So in the battle of Badr, the Muslims were victorious, while in the battle of Uhud, the Muslims suffered certain losses. Therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminded the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, and of course the message is for me and you as well, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to test us and wants to see how much of Iman do we have, how much of sincerity do we have as far as our faith is concerned in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do we trust His plan? Are we questioning His plan? Are we happy with His plan or not? So Allah Ta'ala then poses this question. It's a rhetoric question. It's for me and you to look down into our collars and see when we are faced with a difficulty, with a trial, tribulation, afflicted with a problem, a disease, an illness, whatever that may be. It's something contrary to what we wanted. How are we reacting to that difficulty? Are we enduring it with patience? Are we happy with the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or do we just want a life of peace and serenity, a life of luxury, a life wherein we don't want to be tested at all? We should be living the life of our dreams, etc. No, that will never be the case. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the life of a believer such that some days he will enjoy, some days he will be happy, and while other days he may be sad, he may be upset, other days he may be suffering a difficulty, he may be suffering a loss. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ. One day you have food on the table, the next day you are suffering. One day you have a family member, the next day he is no more there. One day you have wealth, the next day you don't. One day there is a lot of crop and produce in the country, the next day there is drought. So all these types of problems and afflictions will come onto the Muslim Ummah, and like that also onto the rest of mankind. The reality of the matter is, how are we reacting to these problems? How are we answering these tests that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting us through? That would be the answer to see how much we are sincere in our faith and in our iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.